You are listening to the Prepared Warrior Podcast, where law enforcement and military trainers discuss cutting-edge training, tactics, and technology. Here is your host, Jon Wilson.
Welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of the Prepared Warrior. I'm Jon Wilson. My guest for this very first episode is Kelly Keith. I like to start every episode with a quote. This one is from Bruce Lee, who said, "Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own." Our guest, Kelly Keith, is a master trainer who teaches several instructor-level courses for law enforcement all over the world. He's a police sergeant and director of security for the CFL's Winnipeg Blue Bombers, a former undercover vice and plainclothes detective. I think he can lift over 10,000 pounds. Welcome, Kelly Keith. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, John. Not sure about that 10,000 pounds, but thank you.
Well, first off, let's get into what's your policing background.
Well, I'm in my 31st year of policing. When I was 18 years old, I went down to Toronto and became a police cadet. And unfortunately, I left there and went to a family business side of things. And at 1988, I joined Winnipeg Police and was there for 13 years. And as you stated in the intro, was a undercover vice officer, which I loved. That was 5-6 years of being there, and did some other things in policing there. And then I went to western side of Canada, became a Victoria police officer, and also was seconded then to the Justice Institute of BC, where I taught use of force and physical fitness and some high-risk traffic stops. Then from there, went to the total opposite side of Canada. I went to the Atlantic Police Academy, and I was an inspector with the Atlantic Police Academy, teaching use of force, firearms, physical fitness, and officer safety. Then I retired from full-time policing from the Atlantic Police Academy, and now do some part-time policing, where I'm a sergeant with St. Anne Police, and as you stated, also do some teaching and the director of security for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers.
So how did you go from being a police officer and decide to become a teacher in use of force and other things like that?
Well, I had a background. I was training ever since I was in my 20s in jiu-jitsu and kickboxing and lots of other grappling-related sports. So I enjoyed that, and it just went hand in hand. I was teaching there in the academies and where I was actually doing my martial arts training. So I loved teaching from that perspective, and then went into it in law enforcement.
So if I was going into policing today, what would be a few of the best tips that you could give me to stay safe?
First is don't get hit. So
makes sense. Yep.
Well, we train a lot in how to hit. So we train a lot in policing, for example, how to strike a target and how to kick a target, how to hit a target with our bullet from the firearm, with a baton. But at the same time, not getting hit is extremely important. So, by reading the play is really the best way how not to get hit. So, and I'll just flip over into hockey and use Wayne Gretzky as my example here. So Wayne Gretzky himself wasn't the fastest skater or didn't have the best shot or wasn't the greatest at any one thing. But what he was the greatest at and what made him the greatest in his time was this fact to read the play. So he would see where the puck was going to go to or pass the puck where the player should be. So he was always one step ahead of many people. And as a police officer going into it, if you can, read that play and see something forming and see the pre-assaultive cues or recognize, the pattern that people are doing things in and get in front of that and not get hit, then from that point we're able to make up the time, because generally it's the subject themselves that will pull a weapon on us, and then we're in reaction mode, so we need to make up for that time, and by reading the play it allows us to do that. That'd be my number one tip.
Is that what you would call situational awareness, or just knowing the cues? So would you, when you say pulling, you don't want to be the one who has the weapon pulled on you, but at the same time, you don't want to pull it too quick. How do you kind of gauge those things?
Yeah, it is situational awareness, but it's also understanding what we're looking at and putting it into context. So, in other words, if I see you're starting to get agitated with me right now as we're doing this interview, maybe I would make some space at this point, or put a table between us so that because I can see you getting agitated. So that would allow me to have more time to react if you decided now to attack me.
Are there any other key tips you would want to discuss on that?
Not so much in regards to not getting hit, but I think as trainers as well, we need to train to the bell curve of what people most will attack us with. So, for example, 90% of North Americans are right-handed. So if I understand that, and if I'm looking at people that are utilizing their right hand and in posturing themselves to strike me, then I understand that that's the time that I need to make that space. I need to do that. But really, if I have a group of 10 people and I stand there and I say, I want you just to think about you're a thug and you just want to beat me to a pulp. Most people are going to come up to you and they're going to lead with their right hand, and they're not going to lead with a jab to your stomach. They're not going to lead with a kick. They're going to take their right hand and they're going to punch you in the face. Mm-hmm. So as trainers as well, we need to make sure that we're training people for that, for getting punched in the face with the right hand, and get people geared to that. And then from that perspective, now we move off into the other techniques that we train.
Mm-hmm. So preparing essentially for like the haymaker or something like that. I guess the death blow.
Yeah, it's maybe not a death blow, but it's what most people will do. So if we can train police officers for bell curves of what's going to come at them, and then from there go off into the other things, then I think we're preparing that student in a far better manner.
And there are so many options someone could hit you with. How do you teach officers what to expect when a subject attacks them, just with the elements of what's, in the room or what's around them?
Yeah, and that's where you had mentioned situational awareness. So, that's where hopefully again, when I talk about how not to get hit, that's how not to get hit is by that situational awareness. So if I'm in an area, and of course in Canada, lots of us have hockey sticks in a room or something, and I see a subject that's in the area of a hockey stick, instead of me recognizing that just as a straight sports tool, I need to recognize that as that could become a weapon very, very quickly. So moving that subject away from that hockey stick is extremely important to our safety. And as you said, situational awareness, there's, size and strength and everything's really, really important. And all the other skill sets are important, but if we don't have that situational awareness, it doesn't do us any good if they're hitting us in the head and now we're in reaction mode.
What's the biggest difference between the use of force tactics taught today versus, say, 1980 or 1880 or whenever it was you started?
Gee, well, it wasn't 1880, but yeah.
1988, but yeah. Way back when.
Yeah, it does seem like a long time. I actually started with a revolver, and we had typewriters for our reports. Now, if I say typewriter, my kids don't even know what I'm talking about. So. The biggest difference is it's getting more realistic. So I think, the UFC actually dispelled a lot of myths in regards to, what works in a real fight. And, I think more and more the progressive police training incorporates all four ranges of a fight. So in other words, the posturing distance where somebody's in they can't kick me, they're out maybe 20 feet from me, but they're threatening me. So what is the officer doing at that range to prepare themselves if that person rushes them at that point? So, and I'm talking about with every single weapon. I'm talking about with a baton, with a firearm, so depending the threat that's in front of us. How big are they? How big am I? How many people do they have with themselves? Like, is there 4 people with them and I'm by myself, or is there myself and another partner and there's only one of them? And then we train in the striking range, and that's where somebody is within distance of me, where they could kick me or I could kick them, I could punch them, they could punch me. So, and again, that's with all weapons that we have. So it's not just now we train with a firearm where we're in a shooting distance of 20 feet or 10 feet or 5 feet. Now they've grabbed us and we've got a firearm in our hand. How do we deal with that? Or they've grabbed us and with our OC spray where we have a distance that's, if they're closer than 3 feet, it's actually a higher level force with OC spray because of the fact that it could injure the eye. It doesn't mean we can't spray within there, but we have to have added grounds to be able to spray. So, but getting people comfortable in that range is really important. And then there's the clinch or close quarters, where we've grabbed and we've pulled them in, and then there's the ground. So, in 1988 when I first started, we didn't really focus on those ranges. We focused on just a striking range or very, very little. I don't even know if there was ground fighting when I first started. But nowadays, most of the progressive trainers are incorporating actual real techniques for the world.
And you mentioned also that the technology is so much different when you started, the typewriters to computers now. And I guess how has technology been incorporated in the training of today's police officers?
Yeah, and that's anybody, kind of the myths being dispelled with all the cameras that are out there as well now. So where we used to say, well, this works, or if we're saying, well, we kick him in the shins and he backs off and he does this. Well, show me now, and that's what we can do with the cameras being out there is we can take a look at what's actually going on as the street as trainers, and then train them, prepare for that. We can also get the buy-in from the students by using that technology as well. So if I show a video where somebody's standing over a fallen officer and punching that person in the face, and I can say, okay, so if you're in this position, well, now they're not going to be thinking, well, we're never going to be in this position. I'm showing them that video first, then I'm going to show them how to defend themselves out of that position. So it's a really good on both ways, because I think we had so much training that was going on that we're saying, oh, this is what, you hit here and you do this and this works. And any real fighter was knowing it doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, fighting in the streets. Now, does someone who has a martial arts in their background, like yourself, does it translate them into being better able to handle themselves on the street as a police officer in these use of force situations?
It really depends on the actual martial art that they're taking. So if they're taking a martial art where somebody is, there's rules around it, and you have to, when you hit, you have to monitor how hard you hit, or you're not allowed to strike. So if all I did was, let's say, and I love judo, so I'm not disrespecting any one sport, but if that's all I did and I wasn't able to, incorporate some striking in there, well, does that work if somebody's trying to punch you in the face if you're doing a technique? And again, I want to, I love judo. It's a great sport, and I've done it myself. But the training, it depends on what training you're taking if it's going to relate to the street, because you get people that if they're doing point fighting, for example, then maybe they know how to kick, but they don't know what it's like to be truly punched in the face where somebody can punch you in the face.
Mm-hmm. So going on to your courses, one of the courses you teach is the principle-based subject control instructor course. How is the principle-based subject control instructor course different from, say, other courses?
Well, the principle-based, it's exactly what it states. It's everything is based on principles and making it work from that. So, for example, space equals escape. That's a principle, meaning that if I'm in a ground fight and and I'm trying to get to my feet and there's space somewhere that I can move my body, then that's where I'm going to try and escape through, is through that space. So the times of us, saying, well, if they do this, we do that, they do this, we do that. Again, any real fighter understands that doesn't work on the street. You need to have some principles to base around those techniques. So there's lots of things, even such as position before submission. So that's a principle. And what that means is if somebody has a position of advantage on you in a fight, you should try to change your position first before you try to submit them. Because if you can get the dominant position and then try and submit them, your submission is going to work far greater than if you try to submit them when you're in a position of disadvantage. So the more that we can do things around principles, the more that they'll be able to apply them to the street. And just one more example, because it's something that's out there a lot, is even with the with joint locks. If we teach someone how to do a joint lock in a specific situation versus teach them if you've got a wrist and it's like this and you've got the hand that's there and that's how you could get a lock on. If they're looking for those opportunities versus looking for the actual person to apply a certain technique, they're far more likely to come up with a proper solution by just looking for that principle that we're teaching.
And I know Setcan, who you often do training for, they pride itself on the stress testing in their courses. How does the principle-based course tactics hold up under high stress conditions?
Yeah, and that's absolutely imperative. I compare it again. I'll go back to my hockey background a bit here, but I compare that to like a shinny hockey player that where you have your skates and there's no hitting and you have your gloves, your skates, your helmet and puck and everything, and you go out there and you can have all the moves you want, and then you can have the greatest shot and everything else, but then when hitting comes into play, all of a sudden that person fades into the background, and I can tell you even from my own background, we see that a lot, and there's no difference in regards to training. If we're police trainers and we're going to teach use of force, we have to have that stress of getting hit. So, we teach very controlled things in regards to stress, but we would use, so for example, in edged weapon training, we train everything first where there's no stress. You get the students so that they're up to the point where they're competent in their skills, and then at that point we start putting a little more stress, and we can do that with utilizing something like a shock knife in that training, or making it a bit of a competition, or having it so that you've got multiple attackers, and I that's where the street really comes into, because one thing as a trainer that we want that person, when he gets attacked, to be going, been there, done that. I felt this stress. I've been in this position. I'm not like a fish out of water where I don't know what to do. And with principle-based, we are going to put them into drills, and we're going to have some stress drills, and really what we want to do is make it so it's as close to the street without having any injuries.
Do people have different reactions to stress in training? Like individual people have different reactions that you've seen from one another?
Absolutely. And again, a lot of that, it can come from the straight upbringing that they've had. So, if I was brought up with parents that, if I hadn't had contact sports, or if I grew up in a very nice area where, there wasn't fights allowed in school, and so on and so forth, and then I get into policing and now I get attacked, I'm in an area that I've never been in. So that they're already stress inoculated. If you've come from a background where you grew up and it was a rough neighborhood, and you knew you had to protect yourself in school, and you were used to, you've been in a few fights in school, or you played a really rough sport, like if you played rugby or football or hockey, and you were in, again, there's lots of contact. Well, then when somebody attacks you, it's not, you have somewhat already stress inoculated yourself. So because really you can have all the technique you want in the gym, and you can have all the technique on a heavy bag, but it's once you start getting struck and you've got pain, it's now what's happening to that student.
So it really benefits I guess people who haven't the term street smarts, or have learned kind of the stress of growing up with that kind of stress. So would you say it benefits those people more, or just it benefits them both in different ways?
Yeah, the way that if they handled stress already before they get into policing, they're going to be able to walk into policing with a better ability to handle the stress of the policing job itself and all the the other stress that comes with it, and comes with a real fight. So somebody that's never been in it, then it becomes up to the trainers to stress inoculate them when they go through training, and hopefully that's what we're all doing in policing is as trainers we need to make sure that again that when they get attacked, it's been there, done that. I know what to do in this situation, and they don't allow that stress to have them freeze where we can't have that officer freeze.
Now you're in a pretty athletic guy, as I alluded to at the beginning, and I know you train every day. So how important would you say physical fitness is to officer safety skills, and what are the most important physical training techniques to you?
Good question. It's funny because for policing, some people will feel that with policing, you should be, really like big and strong, and others, feel that you should be able to, run 10 miles and be able to run it very quickly. Whereas, for me, it's about a combination of both. I think we need to train ourselves to be able to get in that foot chase, but still have enough energy to be able to get that person of equivalent or bigger size than us down to the ground and get that person handcuffed. So if what we do is we focus all on cardio and we don't focus on strength, that's great. We can catch them, but then we can't actually get them into that cuffing position or beat them, to get him so that we can actually control that person. So whereas if I'm really big and strong but I can't run, I can't chase them, or when I do catch them, all my strength is gone because I'm so tired that I don't have that strength to get them to the ground again, to handcuff them. So my point is, it's really important that we have a combination of strength and cardio. And I can tell you that when I first started competing in jiu-jitsu, I thought strength was all that it was. It was all about strength, and I would read a bodybuilding book and do bodybuilding routines, and I learned very fast that wasn't what benefited control tactics, or that's not what benefits a real fight. It was basically our body that works as a chain, and we need to be able to get that weight through the chain, and when somebody's on top of us, it's making your body work together as a unit. So getting full body exercises in and get away from the beach body and go more into a realistic training with weights that's going to assist you in that fight.
Right, yeah. You don't want to be chasing someone and then just tip over because you're so top heavy, right?
Correct. Well, I don't have to worry about that, but...
And what do you specifically like to do for training? What keeps you going? I know you you juggle medicine balls, or
I love medicine ball training. So what I like to do is I like to combine my cardio work with weights. So for example, if I'm at the stadium, I like running stairs. So I'll run stairs and I'll run stairs, then I'll come down and do some whether it be clean and jerks, or I take medicine balls and throw them over the backwards, and we go down through the field, do that, and then we go back onto the stairs. So I like to go back and forth between cardio and weights during an hour workout. I might do a 50-50 split, and doing again things that I believe. So even when it comes to something as simple as a bench press, there's times that I still like to do bench press, but I like to do a bench press on a physio ball and make my core, and I'll start moving around a bit as I'm doing a bench press on the physio ball while I'm pressing some dumbbells. And so trying to make as much as I can realistic, I think is a benefit that will come back to me if I get into an altercation on the street.
You've written articles in the past and delivered presentations on timidity, or being timid. Can you give us some insight into that area?
Yeah. going through we've kind of talked about that a bit already in regards to, a student that comes in. So when I trained officers at the Justice Institute of BC and the Atlantic Police Academy, I was noticing more and more students that came into the academies that had never been in an altercation before. So they came in, and as soon as we'd start yelling or coming at them or threatening, the timidity came out, and so it was a battle for me, and wanting to make sure that if I'm going to put my signature on somebody's certificate, which I didn't put on all the certificates, so just because you came to the academy that I taught in did not mean you were going to get a signature on it. You had to actually show me that if you're sitting beside somebody that sitting beside a friend of mine in the cruiser car, that they're not going to come back to me and say, how could you have passed this person? So this was something that I spent a lot of time doing, and so even things such as giving lectures on fear, for example, I thought was extremely important. So letting them understand, that feeling of the butterflies and the feeling of being scared is okay. And I can remember making my first drug buy in 1991 when I had never, in that time there wasn't drug courses, and I can remember making it, and at that point I was training really heavy and heavy into the jiu-jitsu, and but I was walking up to a guy trying to buy drugs, and I was scared, and I was just so pissed off with myself, like that I was scared, and I remember that, and then going back and being able to relate that to students. So first off, getting them understanding that, and then understanding that we have to inoculate them to that stress. So in other words, we start really slow with them, and I use boxing gloves, but not to turn them into a boxer, but just so that they get understanding the gloves coming at them, but they know what's coming, and then we're slowly building. We're going up a ladder, really. We're going rung by rung up the ladder, and building up their confidence, and then understanding for them one size doesn't fit all, and that was a huge thing with me as well. That we would, so for training, for example, if I had a smaller person, and let's say I'm doing ground fighting techniques, and I put a 250-pound person in a mount position on a 120-pound officer, and then I'm trying to teach a technique. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, this person's already so stressed that I got to teach him how to do the technique, so he's not in a learning capacity first. So getting people properly trained first, and then understanding there's two things that we can do for 98% of the times. We can either engage or disengage. So three things that dictate who wins and who loses most fights: weapons, numbers, tactics. So if I see, John, that you're 250 pounds and you can lift 11,000 pounds, then
oh yeah, well, that's all true. Yeah.
So if that's the case, well, then I should be thinking about upping my weapon system with you. And so I don't want to, so the timid student isn't thinking, well, I've got to take this person to the ground, or I've got to, get them in a prone position. And they're timid, of course, right away, because they know that that's not really possible. And that also can be, attributed to trainers in the gym and how we teach them. So if I'm doing an armbar takedown, for example, for me to be able, if I'm 120 pounds and I've got a person that's 240 pounds and I'm escorting him out by the arms and he resists, is it realistic that I'm going to be able to do a knee strike and take that guy down to the ground? No, it isn't. So why would I want that person to do it? If he starts resisting, drive off him, up your weapon system. So teaching them realistic techniques and teaching them also what is stress congruent to that person and to me. So what I mean by stress congruent is, what do we do upon somebody that they lurch at us right away, or we're under stress? Like what does the body do instinctively? Like, so we've got these built-in reactions to us, and then make a technique that's built around that first reaction. So if we can make it as realistic as possible, then it gives the student more confidence. And really what that comes down to is the confidence. And when somebody's timid, if we can give them the confidence to feel I can handle this, and I've got all these tools on my belt, I know how to use them, I know when to use them, I've been hit before, I get it, it's not the end of the world, then at that point we can reduce that timidity.
Now, as a court-declared use of force expert, what is the most common theme you are finding that you're having to educate the courts on?
Another good question. Well, first off, it is that one of them is the stress factors, and that what people do under stress. And so if something's going on, and on the video now it's showing that this is going on afterwards, but they didn't perceive it at that point in time. They perceived it differently, or they missed obvious cues, or they did something. And so what officers do under stress might not be exactly what would be expected for that officer. But so the court's getting them to understand that really what we have to do as use of force experts is take a look and go, was the force they used at that time under the stress that they were under reasonable, versus could they have done anything different? Because a lot of people want to become armchair quarterbacks in that situation and say, well, you should have done this, or you shouldn't have hit this hard, or you should have done this. And sure, there's lots of things, and there's lots of things that, if I had a camera on me all the time, that I would want to go back to, and I would want to say, oh, I could have done that better. And all the time I rethink things in my head when I'm in altercations or things, and I know there's things I could have done better. However, under that stress, was it reasonable? And that's probably the number one thing that I do find. And the other thing I just want to mention about what's going on, the change I've seen from court work, is the officer themselves are relating what they've done back to reality-based training, a lot of, and that's something that I didn't see initially. They were relating it to theory or to what they were taught, but now it's the reality-based training that's taking over a lot of things, and which is a good thing, because again, somebody that punches a bag or hits a bag with a baton, in a gym can be very, very different than somebody on the street where they're actually trying to get punched at the same time they're hitting somebody. So I actually think it's a good thing that they're going back to more of the reality-based training versus what's going on in the gym.
That is very interesting, and I think a perfect point to end our very first podcast. Thank you so much for being our first guest on the Prepared Warrior podcast, and keep on lifting those weights. Maybe you'll make it. You'll be as strong as me one day.
Maybe 11,000 pounds.
This has been the Prepared Warrior podcast. For more info on our guests or other episodes, check out thepreparedwarrior.com. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for the Prepared Warrior podcast, email jon@thepreparedwarrior.com.